I have the pleasure this afternoon to be on a panel with the industry-leading analysts from multiple firms, and the analyst community. You all can come on out. I'll have them introduce themselves, but I just wanted to say I really appreciate all the help that the analyst community provides MEF at events and the awards program. All of these analysts who will be participated in our awards judging. You heard several of the winners comment on some of their awards activity. But come on out here. We have Rosemary, Steve, and Brian and Ian. Welcome, everybody. And I'm going to ask each of them to introduce themselves and say a word about their coverage area so you kind of understand where their starting point is in their perspective. So, Rosemary?
Okay. Glad to see so many people here at the end of this very interesting 3 days that we've been here. My name is Rosemary Cochran. I'm the principal and co-founder of Vertical Systems Group. We have been tracking the transitions of the networking industry for many years, and our coverage areas include carrier Ethernet, SD-WAN, wavelengths, fiber, very quantitative, and we publish what we call the leaderboards. We just did one on SD-WAN technology vendors, which is available now on our website, verticalsystems.com.
Great. Steve?
I'm Steve Thomas with Frost & Sullivan. I'm within the ICT practice, and I specifically cover network services. And some of the reports and coverage areas we do within the team is managed SD-WAN, SASE. We also have a vendor report with the SD-WAN vendors. We cover the transport areas as well, things like Ethernet and waves and MPLS still. So that's this area, and I've been with Frost for a year. And prior to that, I had some background in a network operator. Orange Business was my first bit, and then I have 8 years with General Motors and their global telecom group within IT. So I'm kind of bringing that new kind of, well, not new, it's just a different perspective to the analyst community.
Great.
Hi everyone, I'm Brian Washburn. I'm the research director for what we call Service Provider Enterprise and Wholesale. I'm mainly a networks guy. I got my start when central office switches still walked the earth, and overall I cover everything nowadays related to the network and how to make operators more agile and efficient in the B2B enterprise and wholesale space.
And Ian Redpath, I'm also with Omdia, and I cover transport networks and components. So we like to take a whole ecosystem view, like to hear what the carrier community is up to in that space. And then we spend a lot of time with the optical system vendors, looking at the key technologies there, the coherent DSP for one, and then we go right down to seeing what the components community is up to as well. And then that's led us, to look more at data center networks and data center architectures and wave services as well.
Excellent. Thank you all very much. So what I'd like to do is start us out just asking each of them, what were like 2 or 3 key takeaways from the event? That could be a new learning that they had. It could be, I don't want to have too many buzzwords here, but we could.
All buzzwords.
People always joke about buzzwords, but I know ecosystem is a big buzzword. Gen AI is a buzzword, but just maybe, Ian, if we could start with you and then work our way back down.
Sure. Yeah, one of the things for me that was a learning and, maybe just being a tad removed from the day-to-day MEF was just the whole action around the wave market. And so, pushing that into the accelerator model, I was quite interested to hear that. And then when it was mentioned, APIs and being able to order space, power, and cross connects, my eyes just kind of went, oh, wow, I didn't know that that was going on. So I think that's an area that's pretty ripe for more automation, and I think it is going to be a growing part of the bandwidth market.
Yeah, and at my end, well, AI itself, I'm not an AI guy, but perked my ears up with some of the discussions that they had here about how you can take this challenge of private information that is held by a telco, that's very restricted, it can't make its way out into the public sphere, but also tap that into public AI capabilities. So how do you make those two reconcile with one another? And we've seen that challenge in different forms and different ways and different solutions to that. And here we've seen a number of solutions that came to, taking private data, finding a way to exploit public resources and make all of that work together in a way that's compliant.
I kind of look at this as almost like a proud parent to see all the kids playing well together. It's kind of refreshing. I wasn't in the industry specifically for about 10 years, but that was being able to cross provision across and seeing the industry take great strides in doing that. I think is very needed, and it's a way to show the enterprise base kind of what you've been working on for the last 10 years. And so that's the other thing that's always interesting is everything you're working on, people probably won't realize for another 5 or 10 years, which is also pretty good. And it's impressive to see the level of automation that folks have brought to it, as well as it's good to be at a place like MEF where when you are talking about the ecosystems, you have a Salesforce.com coming in to talk about things. You have ServiceNow, I think is very interesting, and then all the other traditional OSSBS providers who are helping you with the whole making your end-to-end systems digitally transformed so that you can help enterprises be digitally transformed. I thought that was really cool to see after not being in the industry for a couple of years.
Very good.
Well, I guess there are a couple of things. One is just that, bringing together the service provider community and the tech providers and also enterprises. I really enjoyed the enterprise panel and their comments about the things that really go on and what's important to them, and some of the frustration about, particularly about connectivity. And I think one of the comments was, we've just got a lot of old stuff, and it's hard to take the old stuff and make it into new stuff. That's pretty technical, I know, but that was one thing. And then the API adoption pace, which I did write down because it was sort of there's about 30 now that are kind of operational, and then it's going up to 69, and then over 100 maybe next year. So that's that is a good pace. And then to see Pascal, I don't know if he's in the room, but Pascal, Monday, I suppose, and just really excited about APIs. Gets very, very excited about it and how awesome they are, right? The awesome APIs. And I was thinking, well, awesome. API is just so mundane, right? Application programming. And I said, you know what? I told him this, and I think we should think about changing that to API as awesome payload interconnectivity. So that's my
Nice. You're kind of referring back to the dinner discussion
Yeah,
about
yeah.
acronyms.
about acronyms, right?
Yeah.
Those acronyms
Very
that you
good
throw
point.
around.
Well, excellent points. To go back to Ian's comment, waves and space and power, that would be one of the payloads, or two of the payloads, right? So we have work around the APIs, and we have this vision of having support for a large number of different payloads, right? I think we are counting 20 plus payloads that we want to be able to support with the APIs. And in fact, I was talking to a large service provider here who said we want to be able to use the APIs to be able to support every single one of our products. So that's fantastic news. That was a key takeaway for me. Getting to playing well together, that was sort of touching on another takeaway that I had, which is the build out of the ecosystem, right? So we have an ecosystem that's forming, and if you think about the convergence of the different trends that are taking place in the market, we've got service providers going through digital transformation. That's one big major trend. We've got the interconnection and co-location growth that players like Equinix are heavily involved in. Then you have the advances of new technologies, SDN, NFV, SD-WAN, SASE. Those are all maturing, have been maturing over the last decade. And then you think about as you touched on, Rosemary, the APIs, the progress that we have in the API adoption. And then the last thing I would highlight is the industry organizations. We heard reference quite a bit here to TM Forum, Camara. I think that's how you say it, right? Camara, as opposed to Camara. And other industry organizations. I think all of those are converging to help create this ecosystem. So it's really exciting to see that. I'd like to circle back to one of the things that we started out the main day with, or yesterday, right? Which is the discussion around network as a service. What is it? What's your take on kind of the different perspectives on network as a service? If any, not everybody has to comment on it, but I'm just kind of curious. Do you think the industry is moving towards a common definition, or we still have a lot of work to do? Probably. What do you think?
I think there's still a lot of work to do. We're talking about a very complex process that has to happen to get to an endpoint that hasn't really been defined, other than the network as a service for really all the things that we touched on and in this panel. And so how long that's going to take, what are the triggers for making it happen, what about the buy-in from different parties of how that's going to work as well, and I think the enterprises need to be more involved because of just what their expectations are in terms of being able to have cloud-like experience and doing all the things they need to do, given that there's just a lot of different types of infrastructure out there that isn't easily upgraded.
Yeah, I think back to Debica's comment about an enterprise doesn't come to me asking for network as a service, right? They have a need. They want me to provide a solution and hide all the stuff that has to happen behind the scenes to make it happen. What do you think, Steve?
Yeah, no, it's the first thing about Fight Club, right? Is you don't talk about Fight Club. So the enterprises are the same way. They're not going to talk to you about NAS. So I think it's aspirational, and that you need to have something that builds a framework for to coalesce the ecosystem, right? And so you can call that NAS, and I think you guys are doing a good job of doing that. But at the end of the day, the enterprises, they just want some sort of easy to use, easy to consume, and while networks and the SDN and SASE are making things more composable, they want to be able to just pick and choose and easily integrate it into their portfolio. And I think network as a service fits that aspiration, but to call it like I agree with Lumen says, more of an experience. And as you look at networks and customers looking at networks, it's you have to be there and do all the automation to fit into that journey. But yeah, it's not necessarily a product. It's easier to say what it not is rather than what it is. I think at this point.
Yeah, good point.
That's my 2 cents at least, and worth every penny, I always say.
Nice.
Talking to enterprises, it's really pretty easy, and it actually starts below the technology layer with things like, I want a contract that's really flexible so that I don't need necessarily bandwidth on demand, but I just, when I want to order something, have it ready for me and don't have some oddball things that happen, have my service order flow through so that I get my service when I want it in time, and don't give me 300 pages of contracts of individual components. Give me one single contract that shows me what you're going to do for me. And so enterprises are clamoring for the stuff that NAS kind of plugs into, and that's where I'm very much on board with NAS. We can call it something different, but like with SD-WAN, that 5 different people deploy it 5 different ways for 5 different purposes. NAS is that sort of product that serves a whole lot of different needs for a whole lot of different people. Some people need a better experience, they need better contracting, they need faster responsiveness from their operator partner, they need a digital experience, but it can be all of those things over time, and we know it's going to have to evolve and get better over time because enterprise expectations always go one way up.
So
And maybe just to cap that from one of the comments that came out of the enterprise panel, and that comment kind of resonated with me quite a bit. It was, you can automate for a portion, but I need this entire end-to-end process delivered quickly. So if there's physical steps that have to happen in the way that are not automated, then it's going to take that long. So, from their perspective, they need the entire piece moving quicker.
I remember that comment as well. So it's a big, okay, so great, you automated that, but then I have to wait 30 to 60 days or whatever it is. But if you think about how the automation is sort of playing out and how the industry is evolving, you do have these interconnected data centers where you've got this automation happening there. It's sort of the central part of what's happening with NAS, right? The automation where you can have on-demand capability inside, in between the data centers, but then it's when you go outside of that, you end up having to deal with access partners and so forth. It gets, there's a lot more delay and complication, but very good point there. I'm going to go back to a comment Radhika made earlier this morning about sort of build versus, I think it was in relation to build versus buy. The enterprise doesn't necessarily think of the service provider network solution as a strategic, or maybe not. They don't look to the service providers as thought leaders so much, and they do more of their own build for strategic reasons. But what would you say would be a way for service providers to sort of get the attention of the enterprise to think of them more strategically? I know, one of the ways to do that is to have events like this where you bring the community together and you share those ideas and you get them to think about something that they haven't thought of before. But any other things that you can think about?
Well, there's a entire sales process that has to happen and for that to be effective. And the service providers have really changed over the years in terms of being more able to look at an application or a requirement and try to do it in a more consultative way to get the sale. And as things become more complex, that gets into a lengthier sales process. It gets into a sales process where you need the training to understand what all the different pieces of that. And that's something that's very different than calling them saying, oh, I want a fiber connection and it's, I want a gig or I want 100 gig and I want it here. And then it becomes one of, okay, now where is it going to be and how much is it and, when am I going to get it? And that's just the, that's the plumbing. That's not the, the sauce.
Yeah, good points. So the, Sean had, I think, ended his presentation with some comments about, well, he hit on a few things, kind of a common vision for the industry, or I guess not just the industry, but service providers, enterprise and cloud players, the automation framework, build out of partnerships, and then cross-operator standardization. Those are all kind of key things that you said that had to, where the industry had to make progress, right? What do you think would be the most critical steps in the areas, particularly that you cover, maybe, where companies can make progress in moving down the path towards network as a service? Any thoughts on that?
I'll let you guys go.
I'll just start. I mean, it's like I had mentioned about being aspirational, but it's understanding the end-to-end part. I think I remember one of the speakers said it. When we first started doing our digital journey inside the telecom operator, there was only like 10 people who actually understood it end-to-end. I think even on enterprises, they're in the same way. I mean, the CIO sometimes doesn't have full end-to-end responsibilities as much as they might, they'll tell you that, but I know from working in large enterprises, it's hard to understand everything, and then you go through mergers and acquisitions and things of that nature. So you pick up assets and shed them off, and that flexibility. I think network as a service, the observability part of it, I think, is key.
Right.
To showcase that better as a service provider, to showcase we know where the connectivity is, we know where your cloud things are, we know where the applications are deployed, and it's a hugely hybrid model, and there's the concept of ripping and replacing things is it's not there anymore. Everything's additive. Even in the telcos, you have these old legacy OSS BSS systems that they keep. The enterprises are the same way. They have these old stacks of applications that they use too. So you have to kind of understand, you have to meet them wherever they are and inject and expand, from that space. But I think the enterprises themselves will have to the industry will have to educate them on how better to use them. Is all I can kind of highlight there.
Yeah, well, the way that I see it, enterprise side or service provider side, the problem or the biggest challenge always remains the access network. And that's the place where telcos on the one hand are unique if they offer those access resources. On the other side, it's always the big headache because that's where all the infrastructure costs go in, and that's where stuff often is, if not proprietary, still orders fall through, things can go wrong. A backhoe happens to be in the wrong place at the wrong time and everything goes down. In the backbone, you can make all sorts of magic happen so that you avoid those sorts of glitches and problems. But that's sort of the great wish of all the other MSPs and cloud providers is like, wouldn't the access network just magically work? And they kind of like to blame the telcos to say, you guys owning the access infrastructure are not delivering to the specs. But that is the difficult part of all of our business, to have the people and the sunk costs and the maintenance of that resource. And when things go wrong, you're just as out as when some other part of the network goes off.
Well, and that's where all the physical work happens,
Yeah.
and that's where the 60-day comes in, and that's still.
Yep.
So one thing's interesting there about the operators happen to have mobile assets, I think, and then also technologies like LEO. So the fixed wireless access and LEO, I think, are also helping combat some of that, because it's going to be a little bit it's easier because it's kind of already in place. A lot of the access to deliver a circuit, you may need a card at the POP or something like that. So that's why it always takes extra time, and obviously you don't pre-provision a bunch of fiber to that particular customer's address, right? So that's the physical part. But being able to use something like LEO or fixed wireless access, you should be able to turn up services faster. And I think that'll help move the industry forward too, as they can take advantage of these quicker installs, and you'll be perceived as a more flexible supplier. I think I have high hopes for those two particular access technologies to help move the needle in the industry.
Yeah, so I was thinking about Tom Schnarr's comment about automation. It's less about automation for a single player, basically. It's more about automation within the ecosystem and that customer experience. And so if you sort of think about the service provider journey, at some point they have to think about moving from basically what I used to call islands of innovation, and you kind of go back to when NAS started a decade ago. It was all about, islands of innovation and on-demand connectivity to the cloud. But you've got to move beyond that and be a player in the ecosystem. So think about the journey, the steps that you have to take along that journey, right? It's, first of all, becoming aware of the activity within the ecosystem, finding an efficient way to play within that, and who to partner with within that ecosystem, and which solution providers you need to engage with on that journey. One of the things that we're doing here are the accelerator programs, I don't know if any of you had a chance to look at the accelerator programs, but if you did, or you heard some of the presentations, you care to comment on what you heard there? Anybody have a chance to look at those?
I didn't have a chance to look at
Okay. Yeah, so one of the accelerator programs, and this was touched on by Michael Kearns this morning, was about the horizontally integrated networks, right? And I thought it was really interesting about, all the steps that you need to consider as you kind of build out this ecosystem, and being able to, use the APIs not just to be able to automate transactions, buy and sell transactions between, wholesale provider and a typical retail service provider, but also bring in other players within that ecosystem, right? Bring in the cloud, bring in other players and other access partners. So that was a quite interesting one. But if you think about sort of the evolution of the market and the adoption, going back to what you talked about earlier, we have to track things really closely. And kind of one request I'd have for the analyst community is to start to work with MEF to think about what can we cover that would help sort of the industry overall to understand this ecosystem better. And one of the things that I do at MEF is I look at the buy and sellers that are adopting or in the process of adopting the APIs. So once they enter into once they express an interest in the LSO APIs, I throw them into the adoption lifecycle. Then we start to explore, okay, well, we look at them as a buyer or seller, then we start to explore where are they in the adoption lifecycle, all the way from interest through to implementation. Yeah. Are they implementing different business functions? Who are their partners that they're working with? What do you think, from your point of view, does the industry need most? I mean, this is one area that I'm spending a lot of my time, but I'm just kind of curious.
the whole industry. I mean,
For us to make more progress on that,
Well,
what are like 2 or 3 things?
Well, I think that it's more like what's the goal? What is, it has to be, there has to be something there for an enterprise to want to care about an LSO. Kind of API and what they need to do to get there, but it has to be an application. There has to be some kind of trigger that says, I need this because, and I need you to tell me why I would do that. Because resources are tight, and the things are quickly moving. So it's usually when we call it trigger, may not be good, but it is sort of something that forces you to do something that you hadn't planned to, but now you have to.
Yeah.
And the pandemic was part of that, right? I mean, all of a sudden things changed dramatically, and people figured out how to do it because you had to. And then Zoom took off, and the things that happened.
And on that front, one of the topics that did come up is on the security side. How can we work with the enterprises working with the service providers on the security front?
Yeah, and so even mentioning the about doing fixed wireless, which could be a good interim solution, but then there's always a security issue as well, and especially if it's going to be a short-term thing, you have to weigh the consequences of is this going to be for 2 months until I get my fiber line or my gig pipe or whatever, and that way that might make sense, but it may not if it's not going to be something that can be managed properly, and it's another process that somebody's got to manage.
Okay. Steve, any thoughts on what needs to happen to grow the market?
Well, I think each organization in and of itself, maybe, I always think that you need the internal evangelist, right? And so as an industry body, maybe figure out ways to work with the suppliers on finding the right resources in their organization to, evangelize and adopt these, because if you have standards and you have APIs, but if they're not that well adopted, you're not going to get the bang for the buck there in terms of all the work that's been provided.
I think this point about the organizations, understand other different professionals within an organization, right? If you think about a service provider, it's one thing to have the technical folks come to a meeting like this and say, oh, wow, okay, I see the progress, and you go back and you share it internally. But if you don't have buy-in at the executive level, if you don't have buy-in from the wholesale sales team or others on the product side, it's more difficult to sort of get things moving. But what we found is companies that have exec level support or have buy-in from multiple groups, they're able to sort of bring those folks together and say, hey, let's move in a common direction, let's start moving, and they can move much more quickly. They can have that transformation internally, right, to be able to work with the partners. That's been invaluable.
Well, I think, I mean, AT&T said today that they had close to 40 suppliers in 49 countries. I have to think that's a pretty good percentage of their business that's going to be automated and using the LSO. So
well,
that highlights.
You know the strategy behind that, right? They're the major buyer,
right?
And so if you want to do business with us, you have to implement the APIs. Right.
And Verizon as well.
It's a pretty good motivator.
I mean, because they could be in 150 countries, but if the 50 is probably 95% of their business, right? So
yeah.
they've automated, that
right.
95%, which is
right.
good.
Because
it's you always have corner cases, so
right.
You don't focus on the corner cases, you focus on the 80-20 stuff, and they're probably well past 80%, I would think.
Yeah.
Yep.
Brian?
Yeah, I do want to bring up briefly just the idea of if you're a service provider, do you want to own the ecosystem, or will you end up being part of somebody else's ecosystems, multiple parties' ecosystems? And that's not necessarily as scary a thought as it may look like, because we already, as service providers, already extensively work through channels and partners and other directions. So there is kind of a force multiplier by being the easy partner to do work with, and then in the future being the highly automated ecosystem partner to do business with. And if someone ends up steering lots of business your way through other partners, then perhaps, even though there isn't maybe as much margin in that direction, that I think is going to be part of our future, is that as service providers, we have to become part of other people's ecosystems as well as host our own, because wherever the customer ends up starting to purchase, you want to be the road that leads to Rome, that brings people to the assets that they want to reach.
Yeah, just to answer one of your earlier questions, Stan, about the accelerators and wavelengths and the optical team there, we did have a talk with Pascal, and we volunteered to make some introductions to help grow that team a little bit more to get that to move along a little quicker. So
Great.
Helping from that perspective.
Yeah, so all great comments. I think, Brian, you touched on a really critical part there at the end. The easy partner to do business with, right?
Yep.
To me, that's kind of like a key takeaway for the event, right? I've come here, I've learned that I can be a player in this ecosystem, I can move down that path, and my goal should be, I want to be easy to work with, whether it's a solution provider, whether it's a service provider, selling, a wholesale service provider trying to sell to the retail partner or whatever.
Remove the barriers, don't make people pick up the phone if they don't want to pick up the phone.
Yeah.
It's as simple as that.
So with that, I think we're going to have to close things out. I want to say thank you very much to the analysts, not only for helping us on the panel, but also for your awards time as judges. I really appreciate that. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.